and now it's testing my broadcast, but it says I'm live. This is annoying. Sometimes YouTube does this, so I think I'm live, but I'm not sure. So for those that are catching this live, when I think it's not, hang in there. We'll start the program in just a moment. This is not a test of the emergency broadcast system. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into Indaba, Africa. Once again, this is Chris coming to you from central Pennsylvania. Whether you find yourself in Ghana, Nigeria, Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, New Zealand, UK, Germany, here in the US or Canada, all places where people tune in and watch the show. In fact, we have subscribers from Singapore that turn into the show. So thank you all for coming in so much. So welcome to everybody. This is Chris once again, as I said. And today's special feature, I have a guest, an exciting guest, whom I became familiar with a couple years ago, but met personally last year when I went to Chicago to be a speaker at the Trade with Africa Summit, which we'll talk about here during today's program. But let me introduce who she is, and then we'll get her on here in just a moment. But my special guest for today's feature is Ms. Toyin Umesiri. She's a serial entrepreneur with several portfolio initiatives, that she champions. She's the CEO of Nazaru LLC, founder of the Trade with Africa Business Summit, creative director and founder of Omooba Beauty brand, and founder and leader of the 360 Women Ministry. Well, we've got more to cover here just in her bio, but that sounds like she's pretty busy, so we're very fortunate to get her today. All right, so Toyin spent over a decade in corporate America at both Walmart headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas, and its Whirlpool Corporation headquarters in Benton Harbor, Michigan. Now, that's interesting. I thought they were actually headquartered in Iowa, so I've learned something useful there. Her experience spans developing supply chain solutions and strategies in the retail and manufacturing industries, which for those of us who do business in Africa, we know that supply chain is a major concern across the continent. So this will be interesting. She's a global influencer and serves as intra-African trade ambassador by appointment of the African Export-Import Bank, or the Afro-Exim Bank, I always get that wrong when I pronounce it, and the African Union, the governing body of the 55 African nations. She is an inspirational speaker featuring as a leading woman in technology on the platform The Spark Women, which is at thesparkwomen.com, which is published in the book Leading Women and recognized as one of Nigeria's 100 most inspiring women by Leading Ladies Africa. Well, perhaps she's one of Nigeria's most inspiring women, but we have her here in the States, and we're going to hold on to her. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome in now my guest. There we go. All right. So Toyin, welcome aboard. Good to see you this morning.
Wow. Amazing. Good to see you. OMG. Wow. That's incredible. Just listening to you talk about the work that we do, it's just, I'm blown away. Thank you so much for that kind introduction.
No, you're most welcome. I just knew you through email and a quick phone call or so before we actually had the Trade with Africa Summit last August in Chicago. And then I met you and I'm like, wow. She's all that people sold her as. She's pretty impressive.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you. You're amazing as well. Like, I could spend all day like having a conversation with you. You're very extremely interesting. You have a depth of knowledge. And literally, I could just sit at your feet and say, hey, tell me more. I want to hear more. So it's such an honor to be here. And it looks like you're having an amazing time on your show as well.
Well, thanks a lot, Toyin. It's as I mentioned, I had a long string of just male guests, and nothing against men or women, but you got to mix things up. And so this week you're my third female guest, and so that's exciting. And it looks like I may have just booked a fourth female guest, so we're balancing things out a little bit. People like to pretend there's no difference between men and women, but that's nonsense. That's nonsense. We are different. Our makeup is different, and we view things differently based on where we come from, each individual. But certainly men and women are different. So do you think I'm off base, or do you agree with that?
Well, I like to say my diversity is my advantage.
Yes.
Right. So being a woman, being a Black woman, being an African is an advantage to me in the world of business because I see the world differently, I solve differently, and I engage differently. And that's an advantage because nobody can do it the way I do it. Nobody sees the world the way I see it. So for me, it's an advantage. I love differently the way I treat my kids. It's different from the way my husband manages them. I hear them differently. I engage with them differently. I love on them differently. So I see us as we have a role to play in the society, and we don't need anybody's permission to play that role.
No, absolutely. I think it's fantastic. And I really like the way that you talk about the fact that you're a woman, you're a Black woman, and African, and those are advantages. Oftentimes we hear people with a victim culture saying these are disadvantages. I don't see it that way at all. I think that that all of that is part of who you are, and it makes you dynamic the way you are. That's how I see it. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why, you talked about the 360 woman. That's a ministry I run on the side because I also see an opportunity to engage with other women in terms of how they live life with clarity, with purpose and direction, right? So that they are more purposeful in their living and they are more channeled, they're channeling their energy productively versus just waiting for somebody to affirm them, to give them permission, whatever it is people are waiting for. And really, it also has to do with not just women, but men as well. Is the fact that if we know that we have value and we have something to bring to the world, then let's focus on how we bring that solution to the world and bringing people along in terms of how we transform the world that we live in. So for me, that's where I'm focused on. That's where my energy is, right? Because energy, passion is limited liability. You don't want to waste it. So I try to just laser focused in my own approach. So yes, that's at my core what I believe in.
no, I think that's awesome. And unless you believe in reincarnation, this is the only journey you get on the planet in this existence. So you might as well make the most of it.
Exactly. I'm like, this is it, guys. This is the life. I'm like, this is my life. I get to live it fully, right? I also joke, with my husband, like, I'm a strong believer. So I'm like, when I get to God and he asks me, Toyin, how did you do? I'll be like, I tried. That's all I'm going to say. I tried, God.
Well,
I gave it my best.
I put my best foot forward. That's all I could do.
I did my best.
We have some folks tuning in from South Africa, so they're sending greetings from South Africa. I have a large number of my subscribers from South Africa. So we have Skulk Walters on here, and he's saying hello from a freezing Pretoria. Because remember, Southern Hemisphere, so it's wintertime there. They're quite cold.
Yeah. Hello, South Africa.
Yeah, we have Anton and Rudy. So just so that folks know, if you've got questions, go ahead and ask them in the chat. I have enabled Super Chat, and so if you want to do that at any course of the interview today, you're welcome to do that as well. But let's go ahead and get started and ask Toyin a little bit about herself. So, okay, listening to your accent, it's pretty clear to me that you don't come from Alabama. So could you tell us about your childhood or where you're from, where you grew up, and how you got to where you are? Not your career, but living and how now you're in Chicago, so...
Yes. Okay. So I was born in Nigeria. There's something interesting, just in case any Nigerian is actually watching. My parents are Yoruba. I was born in Kaduna, which is the north, and my husband is Igbo. For any Nigeria, they understand that's like a rare scenario.
That is an unbelievably rare scenario. So you're Yoruba, Igbo, which is, not that rare. That does happen. But growing up in Kaduna, that's nowhere near either of those groups.
Yes, I was born in Tudunwada, Kaduna, to Yoruba parents. And the way the country is right now, people go, really? I'm like, yes, I was born on the northern side, which is predominantly Muslim before we moved back south. So I was born in Nigeria, grew up in Nigeria. I actually didn't come to the United States until I was in my 20s. So I was really formed and shaped on the continent. And then I came to the United States for my graduate program, Masters of Science in Information Systems from Central Michigan University.
Chippewas.
So after my graduate program is when I moved into the corporate world. So, but basically, I think the key thing is I was shaped directly on the continent before I even migrated to the United States.
No, absolutely. That's important for folks to understand. So that your acculturation was entirely Nigerian. That's how you grew up. It wasn't like because some folks, they're 6 or 8 or 10 years old, then their family moves somewhere else. They go to Europe, they go somewhere in Africa, or they come to the U.S. and you're different. So you get a mix of the two. But you're clearly acculturated in Nigeria. And a very unusual acculturation, as you said, Igbo and Yoruba, plus you grew up way up in the north, which is very strange. But so now I found it interesting that you went to Central Michigan, and I'll tell you what, normally I would cancel the rest of the interview right here, flat out. Well, that's not a real school. I went to the Ohio University, which is also the Mid-American Conference.
Oh, come on. Well, Ohio, I lived in Ohio as well, Bowling Green, Ohio for a while there. So come on.
Well, now, see, that doesn't help you out either. Bowling Green and Miami are small farming and vo-technical schools that we don't really mention in good circles because they don't provide a proper higher education. I'm just saying.
had a blast. I had a blast. I think it was in the middle. Central Michigan is in the middle of nowhere, so you really don't have a lot of distractions. But the culture, the people, oh my goodness, amazing, amazing, amazing experience. I got married in Mount Pleasant, where the school is. I mean, it feels like home. If I'm going back home, in America, would be Central Michigan, Mount Pleasant, or Arkansas. So there are places where really felt like home to me. So amazing people. I still keep in touch.
Well, I guess something good can come out of Michigan. I mean, you did get married there, but other than that, I really can't say much.
I don't believe you.
Actually, I spent a summer in Grayling, Michigan, as a National Guardsman when I was at university for the Ohio National Guard. We went up to Grayling, and I spent about a month up there, and it was quite an interesting experience. It was very close to the Au Salvo River. Anyway, but I'm getting away from the important stuff here, so let's get to some more important things. So you came to the States, you went to graduate school at Central Michigan, and then so I presume you did undergraduate in Nigeria.
Yes, I did undergraduate. I studied mathematics and computer science. So I'm good with numbers.
Oh my, well that comes in handy in business, thank goodness.
Yes.
Okay, so you came to the States, and at some point you wound up working in different places, and eventually you wound up at Walmart. Can you give us kind of the path to Walmart? Did you get into that right away? Because you were an executive at Walmart, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I was in upper, like middle management, what do you call it? But my role at Walmart kind of, because I was in strategy, I was extremely exposed to a lot of the executives because of my strategic role. So I owned a portfolio of about $250 million in terms of technology spend. And I helped put together the 2-year, 3-year, 5-year roadmap in terms of directionally where we were going to invest that spend, and just working with all the executives to line and agree in terms of the direction of the spend and the technologies we're going to introduce. So my role kind of just exposed me greatly to a lot of the leadership, unlike other functional roles. So my path to Walmart was that after graduate school, I joined Whirlpool Corporation, Michigan, Benton Harbor, Michigan. And I worked for Whirlpool for about 7 years, deploying SAP solutions globally. So I've always had this global scope in terms of the work that I do, in terms of the implementation, in terms of the companies I work for. So coming into Arkansas, it was actually my husband. My husband is a professor. He has a PhD and he teaches chemistry, which is not my favorite subject. So he is smarter than I am. So he accepted an opportunity in Arkansas, and I was in the technology space, which allowed me to move. So I moved to Arkansas with him. And then once we got to, he worked for John Brown University in Salem Springs, Arkansas. And when we moved there, what I found out was that Walmart was right there, like not too far away. And then I applied for a job, and then I was hired to help lead their global sourcing supplier management solution globally, working with their vendor management offices in terms of how they buy, what they buy around the world. So I was hired in to lead a new team of people, and I spent about 5 years with Walmart.
So what was that experience like? I mean, people have different views of Walmart from the outside. Those who are not working for the company, there's, of course, you have the popular media perception of them where they treat their workers poorly. They pay them like indentured servants. And then you have, of course, legions of people, tens of millions who are loyal Walmart customers. And then you have others who are investors who would look at it more objectively, one would imagine. So what's it like in Walmart working? I mean, is all the stereotypes and myth that we hear about, or is it different?
Well, I'll say this. I had all that mind too before I joined. And my impression before I joined and after I joined are like polar opposites, right? So the impression out there made me skeptical in terms of, do I really want to join? Is it really true? And then once I joined from day one, I stepped into a new world that was amazing, that was incredible, the culture. I think the biggest thing that goes for Walmart, it's the culture. It's the simplicity, it's the service mindset. They have a servant leadership culture at Walmart. And basically, it's also, they have an open door policy. So you do have access to anybody, anywhere in the company because of their open door policy. And guess what? I leveraged that a lot in terms of connecting with the most amazing human beings I've ever met in my life. I met them at Walmart. And for me, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't, I like to say I had exposure to the best leaders in the world. So I understand. I had that same mindset in terms of all that is out there about Walmart. But, once you've walked inside, at least at the corporate level, you get a different feel of the culture of the people, what they truly believe. Walmart is really about doing good. So that's what I walked away with. Amazing people, amazing leaders. My experience was great. Any big corporation would have its own management issues, right? Great. But as a company, in terms of their philosophy, it's something that I really admire.
No, that's fantastic. And I asked that question specifically because people from the outside often look at an organization and make all kinds of presumptions and assume things about it. And of course, the popular media always runs with stories, and you can always find an employee who's had a bad experience, either because of their own conduct or because of misfortune, or in fact, they might have been mistreated. That does happen in companies. But from what I know of Walmart, from the outside, it's not the popular media thing. I see it as a company, as you've described, that has a vision that by and large treats its employees very well. And people complaining about employees making $15 an hour are missing the point that people working at burger joints are making $8 an hour in the same place. So it's, they've also got benefit packages, and they're all over the planet. They're a global company.
Right. And if I can make a case for Walmart along that line is you can start anywhere in the company, but there's a path for you to advance, right? And case in point, the current CEO of Walmart, Doug McMillon, started at the very base of that pyramid, pushing carts. That's where he started from. So, and he never would have dreamt to be the CEO of that company when he started. When you're pushing carts, that's like the bottom of the bottom, right? But the amazing thing about that company is the fact that they actually put processes and opportunities in place. They don't want you to stop at the base. They actually urge you on, and how far you go with the company depends on you. Like, they're not going to push you into a role you don't want to go. But interestingly, part of what I also walked away with was the fact that there's so much work to do at the company. They need as many people rolling up their sleeves to do it. So they're not going to stand in your way if you're hungry to add value, to grow your career, to grow yourself. That's something. There are over 2.2 million employees at Walmart. They are ready to add on more.
That's insane. 2.2 million people.
There's something there around opportunity and advancement and growing your career and the systems and processes they've put in place to help people fulfill their dreams.
I remember the days of Walmart back when I was considering investing and they had 200,000 or 300,000 employees. Now they have 2.2 million employees worldwide. It's insane.
It's insane. But for me, seeing that in operation and seeing how that is run, that's just, it blows my mind, and it's part of what gives me the confidence to do what I'm doing today.
Well, I worked at university for United Parcel Service, or UPS. What can Brown do for you? And what I discovered there when I worked for them is that almost all their executives were homegrown, people who started pushing packages, working as a clerk in the front for the customers or something like that, or driving a truck. And it was really a corporate culture there that really rewarded people who had talent and were hungry, like you said, to come up. So I think it's refreshing to see that amongst companies. Pretty good stuff. For folks just tuning in now, this is Chris White Africa on the Indaba Africa, or this is Indaba Africa on the Chris White Africa channel. And this is Friday's special feature. My guest today is Ms. Toyin Umesiri, who is originally from Nigeria, but like many talented people around the world, the United States has one great feature. We're very good at poaching talent. We steal it, we bring it, we keep it here, and we profit from it. So thank you, Nigeria, for providing us with this wonderful entrepreneur. And we're talking to her today. She's smiling. I see that. But oh, by the way, so someone loved your garment there. They said dress, but I don't know if you're wearing a dress or just a blouse, but they loved it.
Oh, thank you. I'm also I'm a fashionista as well.
Okay. Good stuff.
Oh, if you can't tell, I'm kind of like a very simple. I try to be simple-minded. I just like to have fun. So thank you for whoever's put that comment. I really appreciate it. You need to go check out my brand as well. We're doing some incredible things with products.
Well, we're going to talk about your brands here in just a couple of minutes. That was from Bobby B that said that. So a number of folks are just coming in now and saying they're sorry they're late. There's no need to apologize for being late, ladies and gentlemen. This is on YouTube. If you can't make the live stream and be here to ask questions, you can tune in after the fact and watch the video. It'll be available. So anyway, let me see what else we got. Bobby B says, I'm curious if your guest can compare working in America to working or starting a business in Nigeria. That's a good question. Based on the description, I assume that's where she lives and works. No, she lives in Chicago, but she's from Nigeria originally. But can you have some experience working at all in Nigeria? Can you share the differences?
Yes, briefly. I worked briefly, and so I think the biggest difference is about opportunity, right? The biggest difference is what opportunities exist and how many people can leverage that opportunity. In America, anybody, anywhere can become anything they want to be, right?
Wait a second. That's not the narrative I've been fed in the mainstream media for the last couple months. No, you can't. No, only certain people can have. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, I'm kind of, I usually take people, my funny bone sometimes, I'm not able to get it if you're joking or not. So I was like, what did you just say? And then when you finish, I was like, okay, good. I understand. No, but honestly, the biggest thing with America is an individual with an idea can go out there, collaborate with people, connect with people. They can network their way to success. The chances of succeeding in America is higher than that of, Africa and most places around the world. However, the good thing about Africa, though, is the culture. Right, there's a culture that is so different from US. There's still the traditional values in terms of the community. To raise a child, it takes a village. Some people still tell me now that maybe that has changed. I've been gone now for many years, but when I was growing up, you really do have this feeling like there are eyes is watching you, right? Like if you do the wrong thing before you get home, your parents might find out. And even in the workplace as well, it's used to be that. I don't know now, but then it used to be that community or communal type of environment. So that's really the main difference. Opportunity for the US, that would be an advantage, but on the continent, it's still much grounded in traditional values.
Well, having spent much of the last 20 years living on the continent, across the continent, 8 different countries, I can attest to your point. It is very much true. But Africa is strange in this context. As we're in the 21st century, the traditional is there and it's resisting, and the modern is encroaching. And it's kind of like where the U.S. was probably a century ago as far as the traditional and the modern encroaching on each other. And so in some places you have a really strange mix where you have these traditional values, but then you have modern behavior, if you understand what I mean, say from the youth. And so it creates an odd dichotomy. But, you go back around the family, say you're in Monrovia and you go back to West Point and you're living in West Point, but you've been hanging out downtown, misbehaving or acting the fool. You go back and everybody knows you've been acting the fool, and you walk over an auntie or a grandmother and you stand there like a very, misbehaved child as you get dressed down, and then you change your behavior. It's interesting, that dynamic.
Yes. And do you know the funny thing is, I think first or second gen immigrants behave that way. They actually have two cultures. They have to, even in America, where when they're home, their parents that grew up in Africa and knows Africa, they have these principles at home. So when the kid comes home, it's like, oh, I'm in Africa now. But when they go out to school or go out with their friends, they're like really, really in America. So it's interesting that you say that there's this blend of, modern and traditional African culture that even right here in America, a lot of the first and second generation kids, they actually have to find out how to live those two lives.
Well, it's actually a good point that you make, and it's really is almost the same dynamic. The one difference being that with immigrants to America, historically, what's happened is that you have these kids living in two worlds, whether they're born abroad or born in America. Even those born in America, to foreign first-generation immigrants, find themselves caught in these two worlds. At home, it's one thing. Outside of home, it's quite different. Of course, you spend 70% of your time away from the home as a child because you're in school and such. either studying or getting into trouble, one of the two, or both. And so you have that. But the other piece of this, too, is that while they struggle with both cultures, there's always been a strong push for the family to assimilate and become part of American society. Whereas you don't have that push necessarily, say, in Nigeria, if you're coming from a rural village and moving to Lagos or to Abuja, or if you're living in Kinshasa after having lived out in the bush or something like that. So it's a similar dynamic, almost the same, but there isn't quite the same push, whereas there's a push to assimilate here in the U.S. And I think that's an important correlation that you made there.
Yeah. I watch my kids, so I catch my son, like when he comes down from the bus, even the way he speaks, for the first few minutes when I grab him from the bus stop is different. When he comes into the house, he's like different. I'm like, oh my God, this is just human nature, right? It's not that you try to be that, but it's just the way we adapt, right? It's a skill that allows us to adapt to wherever we find ourselves.
Absolutely. I was going to ask about your kids because your husband's a chemist, a PhD. You're all into math and IT. So what, your kids are going to be into fine arts and dance?
I mean, it's incredible. Like, I watch my kids. I'm like, you guys, my daughter, the little one, I say, you're scary smart. You're scary with your smartness right now. Like, she is just, she's amazing. They are amazing. It's just incredible to watch how their brain works and how they're able to put two and two together. Like, just as an example, yesterday I was on my computer. She's 4. She came to me and she saw www. And she said, Mommy, what's www? And me thinking I was going to blow her mind, I said, the World Wide Web. And she took a moment and said, oh, I know it's the internet. I'm like, what?
Kids.
Oh
That's hilarious.
Like, I had to call my husband and say, what? I thought I was blowing her away, a 4-year-old with World Wide Web. And she said, Mom, it's the internet. I'm like, who told you that? Who told you that? So
no, that's hilarious.
I'm raising right now at 4 years old. I just told her www is the World Wide Web, and she made that connection and said, oh, internet. That's the internet. I get it now. I'm like, wow. Okay.
No, it can be quite amazing how they tie things together. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I said I usually have fun. Like the way I see my world, I'm usually just everywhere I look, there are things we should marvel. We should always be looking at the world we live in, and we should always be deriving joy. There are enough things that we could look at that would make us really sad. But I try to focus on the positive side of life and the joys, the thrills of life. And that kind of helps me stay energized as well.
Well, I can attest to that because last year during the Trade with Africa Summit in Chicago on the McDonald's University campus there, I saw there a few moments when not everything was running smoothly as it should have been, but you didn't seem stressed. You were under control, directing people to get things done, and you showed good leadership there. So clearly you try to look on the bright side of things.
I appreciate that. And it's also part of the lessons I've learned even in corporate America. Like if you've worked at Walmart, you know stuff like you're running under pressure, right? Like I have had, vice presidents standing right here at my shoulder and they're saying, fix this, right? They're like, fix this. And you just, you're like, chill out, guys. Let's just have fun. We're going to fix it. There's fire on the mountain. Everybody's like, you just learn to work under pressure. It's like, it's not, this is not rocket science. It's not nuclear physics. It's not, we're not blowing anybody up like, military or anything. This is just, we're having fun here. So it's one of the trainings I've got to be able to work under pressure and just to have fun and just, and be real, be vulnerable, be real, communicate and say, hey, we're all in this together. So I really credit that to some of the experiences I had in corporate America in terms of the pressures of managing incredibly, sophisticated systems and, investments that you have to manage and still pull it through.
Well, let me do a little bit of housekeeping here very quickly, Toyin. So first off, there's a number of folks who are chatting now, so thank you for that. Second, not e-begging here, but if you didn't notice, I have activated the super chat on this channel now because a lot of people are asking me to do it. I did it yesterday, and super chats came in. But just to remind folks, super chats there if you'd like to super chat and get a question in. But short of that, let me just remind folks, thank you for tuning in. You're listening to Indaba Africa. This is Chris Wyatt on the Chris Wyatt Africa channel. My special guest for today's special feature is Ms. Toyin Umesiri, who is based in Chicago. She's a serial entrepreneur, a former Walmart executive and Whirlpool executive, grew up in Nigeria, but like many talented people in the United States, we've poached her and we've got her here. In fact, somebody, after I said that, said, well, good for us. We stole another good one. But we got good talent here. So let me see some of the other questions here very quickly. Michelle, people are talking about the culture issue, about the differences you and I were just talking about a few moments ago. I think Bobby B said community cohesion sounds nice. We lack that many areas of the U.S. Thanks for the answer, much appreciated. And then Michelle Jardine says, I might be wrong, but I get the feeling that the family cohesion in South Africa is not so strong anymore. Michelle, I'm not sure that's the case in my experiences in South Africa, but I do think that the pressures of modernization and urbanization especially are really putting strains in South Africa, because so many people are moving, like they are in Nigeria, towards the major cities, that it has a big strain and fraying that thread, the traditional of the family. But I think it still exists. Were you going to say something there, Toyin?
Well, I agree with you. I'm listening to you. I agree. I actually feel wherever you are in the world, you have to decide how you want to live your life, right? I think you can find yourself in a culture that do not have the traditional values, but you can create it for yourself. I think even in America, even when I worked in corporate space, extreme pressure, but I had a desire to build a home in a certain way and to try and recreate the opportunities that my parents gave me. Right. I'm on a mission to try and recreate that community, for my own kids. So I do things, like social things with friends, and we all bring our kids together, because it doesn't happen if we don't create it. I think it's harder. It's harder to have that community in a place like America, especially if you're an immigrant, because for me, every immigrant has kind of detach themselves from their natural community, right? Yeah. So if I were back home to where I was raised, I'll still know a ton of people who went to church with, I'll still know a ton of people who went to school with. But then when you leave that natural community and you come to a new nation, if you don't rebuild a community for yourself, you're going to be a loner, right? And what I've also found, because I study systems, I study community, I study how people run, and I've studied how people are successful doing what they do. One of the biggest things about success in business is that your network, right? Your business, who knows you and who do you know, right? So for me, I have this message to the immigrant community to say, make sure you're building a support system, a community for yourself. Even if you're finding there is none, build it for yourself, for your kids, for your family, for your business. You're going to need it in order to survive and thrive. So that's what I have done, whether for my business in terms of how I've networked my way to building the platforms, or even for my family in terms of trying to connect my family and my kids, especially to other similar minded families. I have to work harder to get that done versus if I were still back in Nigeria.
Well, we've got a couple really good questions, but before I do that, Michelle Jardin is saying your daughter's a clever girl for such a great age. Yeah. But then a couple really good questions here. Let me get the first one from Keith, and then her name is, she's Afrikaans speaking in South Africa, and it's spelled Tercia, but the Afrikaners pronounce it Tertia. So, but just so you know, Tertia Basson. But let me get to Keith's first. Keith's question is to both of us, and says, he says that Chris says that the U.S. will value you in the U.S. How are your enterprise and trade links benefiting Africa and individuals there? Which countries and which economic sectors?
Okay, so when I embarked on, trade with Africa, building a narrative around trade, providing services around trade with Africa, the first thing that I came up against in terms of what I call the resistance, it's a mindset. There's a mindset that we actually have to go after first. Mindset in terms of the way the world sees Africa is primarily through the lens of trade, of aid, foreign aid, right? Because of the imagery we've seen for the last 20, 30 years in terms of, help Africa, donate to Africa. That image actually takes away from investments, because the business community is about return on investment. They're about they look at a region through the lens of, if I put $1 in, what do I get back? They're not looking at it through the lens of aid. So the first thing we had to do was to declare that when you're saying Africa, we're not talking in terms of charity or foreign aid. We're actually talking about through the lens of commerce. That was the first thing that we had to do, because I said, I'm not from the world of charity. I'm not doing what I'm doing because of charity. This is actually an enterprise that we're building around providing services to drive trade engagement with the continent. So that's the first thing that we had to lay as a foundation. And then going back to your question in terms of region, what we found out is that the continent itself, given the size, different regions have different, what we call competitive advantages. When you think about Nigeria, the population is an advantage, even though they've not maximized the power that population could bring when it comes to human capital development, right? When you think about the natural resources, the oil, Nigeria holds that. When you move to Ghana, Ghana has its own in terms of the tourism aspects that they're now pushing forward in terms of cocoa. When you think about East Africa, you think about Kenya with the textile manufacturing happening there. When you think about South Africa with the wine, with the fruits, with all of that. So what we then do when we engage with enterprises, with businesses in America, after we've said this is not about charity, the next thing we try to get them to see is, don't look at the continent now through the lens of one country. Try and develop a continent-wide strategy, knowing that different regions has different things that they can offer you, right? And then with the Continental Free Trade Agreement, that also opens up another whole conversation as you're developing a market entry strategy. So each region, I think, has a lot to offer, but we have to also say, what's your competitive advantage? Like, what can you do best or better than any other place in the world? Because when you think companies and leaders and business executives, they have options, right? They have options. So if you're saying, come and manufacture your textile in Kenya, okay, tell me why I shouldn't go to Vietnam. Why, if I were to look at Vietnam and the cost of implementing that in Vietnam versus Kenya, what's your competitive advantage? In the previous narrative, it would be like, oh, just help Africa, just help Africa. But that wouldn't do. There's a new phrase that also helps. It's called shared value. You can now make a case for shared value. You can make money doing good while having greater impact as well. Your impact on the continent while you're still making money will be greater than if you went somewhere else. So there's just a different type of conversation we have to have when it comes to trade and commercial engagement on the continent. And we have to be savvy how we have that conversation, because people don't want to see it as charity. The moment you say charity, it's like the business side they just shut off. You can't have that conversation anymore.
Well, there's a couple points that you make there just to go over them. You talk about competitive advantage, and for instance, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act gives a lot of countries in Africa competitive advantage over, say, producers in Europe. For instance, in South Africa, they produce BMW parts for BMW automobiles. They're cheaper to ship to the U.S. because they qualify for AGOA with no import duties whatsoever than the Germans, who pay 2 to 4%, I think it is, to ship their BMW parts here. So a lot of the BMW parts that go into cars in the U.S. actually come from South Africa. So that's a competitive advantage. But of course, thinking back to Adam Smith's concept of capitalism, comparative advantage is a real thing. And there are parts of Africa that do have comparative advantage for certain marketplaces. But one thing that you mentioned here that I found interesting is you talk about Nigeria as an advantage. And I think a lot of people don't think about it that way. Nigeria is about 200 million people. That's a lot of people. And even if a lot of people don't have a lot of money, a lot of people adding up a few pennies here, a few pennies there winds up being quite a bit of business if you look at it that way. So one of the things I've been pushing about, one of the reasons I've focused a lot on business, even while I was still in uniform, and you know this because you saw my presentation last year, is that no matter what we do with family planning, no matter what happens, today Africa's 1.3 billion people will become 2.3 to 2.5 billion people in the year 2050. Mm-hmm. Now, that will be a consumer class of about 1.3 billion consumers, or 4 times the size of the U.S. today. So the U.S., in my view, if it doesn't look at the markets in Africa and find a way to be there and be part of it, is going to miss out on the biggest bonanza and growth in consumer spending in the history of mankind. Just my thoughts. What do you think about that?
Yes, and I think that number, depending on how you look at it, could create chaos or could create opportunity. So if we were to think along the line of productivity, right? For me, is how productive is that workforce going to be? There could be a pain point, right? Where they could be on the streets without education. They could go into crime. They could go in, like, that's why I'm saying, like, the population growth, if human capital development is not fundamental, right, with the policies that go in the next 10, 20 years, that population growth could go either way, right? It could go this way or that way. But for me, I want to say, why don't we focus on productivity, right? So as a business person, if you have 1 staff, 2 staff, and you train them well, you want to get them, as productive as they can be. That's what Nigeria hasn't done. In fact, when I look at the actual trade data, Kenya is outperforming Nigeria in terms of its exports under AGOA. Why? Well, Nigeria, because of its oil, if you follow the oil value chain, somebody somewhere points to a ground and say, hey, there's oil here. You give them rights to drill. They drill the oil for you. They give you the money. Well, that money goes into the government's hand. Then, it's like a funnel. The money starts big and then it starts dwindling, and very few drops end up on the streets of Nigeria. But the world of trade, non-oil exports, the money actually starts from the base, right? The people doing the work gets the money, and then the government taxes them. So the government actually, in order for the government to get more revenue, they have to create enabling environment to get as many people productive as possible. That's the flip, right? The oil value chain doesn't create as many jobs as the trade non-oil export value chain, where the base of the pyramid, when you think about agriculture, when you think about manufacturing, when you think about infrastructure development at the base, the people doing the work, executing the contracts, actually get the money in their hands. Whereas when it comes to oil, it's a government transaction with the private sector, and then the government derives the revenue. That's how it's designed today. So for me, when you think about the population growth, it's around how do you tap into that population and make them as productive as possible? Because if we don't, it could be an overnight nightmare for many places. And just think about Nigeria right now, unemployment and all of that. So that's something we should watch. That's the way I see it. It's a conversation about productivity.
Well, you nearly got me triggered there, Toyin. I was doing my best to stay calm because those who know me well know I have a great disdain for government interference in the business world and state-owned enterprises and things like that. I've done many videos railing about South African Airways and why it's such a disaster, but not just railing, also offering recommendations. Of course, they're not going to follow mine. But we're coming up on the last third of the hour here, so there's a couple really good questions here, and I'll get to them. And then I'd like to talk about your businesses so we can talk about that and trade with Africa, because that's one of the reasons why I want you on here. But before we get there, let me throw this in. I don't know who Bobby B is, but Bobby B's been active in the chat here. Thank you so much for that. And he's talking to one of the other chatters here who uses the tag EduTube. And he says, Afrikaans is a language. I figured each country or region had their own languages. I'm going to learn so much from this channel. Glad I found you all. Well, we're glad that you're here, Bobby. I don't think you're being facetious, but assuming you're not being facetious, yes, Afrikaans is a language. Its origins come from Dutch, 17th century Dutch. It's greatly influenced by African languages like some of the San or Bushman languages, Xhosa, as well as Malay languages from Indonesia and the Malaysian Peninsula, where the Dutch East India Company brought people from there and enslaved them to the Western Cape. And so the language came from Dutch with those influences and developed into its own language in its own right eventually. And today Afrikaans is spoken by about 14 million people in South Africa. Of them, about 8 million are first language speakers of the language. And it is also spoken around the world from the South African diaspora. And what is interesting is a lot of people don't realize that they look at Afrikaans and go, well, that's the language of the white South Africans. Well, it's a minority of white South Africans that actually speak the language as a first language, about 2.4, 2.5 million South Africans. And then you have about 5 million mixed race, or coloreds, as they say in South Africa, which is not a derogatory term in South Africa. That's an acceptable term. It's a proud term. And then beyond that, you actually have about 190,000 Black Africans whose first language is Afrikaans as a result of historical developments, and about 280,000 Indians in South Africa. So it's a language spoken by a lot of people, but it has a very negative connotation because of the ties to apartheid, and so people don't always view it in a positive fashion, which is unfortunate because it's a lovely language, easy to learn, to read, but not to speak. It's kind of brutal to speak. Not to attack the South Africans, but it's kind of hard to speak. Ek praat nie Afrikaans nie, which basically means I don't speak Afrikaans. So let me get there's a couple really quick questions here, Toyin, that I want to get to. And where's it at? I'm sorry, it was from, it was from Tertia. Yeah. Tertia says, what's your approach to multiculturalism and bilingualism? How are you teaching your children language, or are you teaching them other languages? Are you teaching them Igbo? Are you teaching them Yoruba? Are you teaching them anything?
I am failing. I'm failing big time.
As do most immigrant parents.
My husband and myself, we don't speak the same language. Even though we're from Nigeria, I'm Yoruba, he's Igbo. We don't speak the same language. So, we speak English. Nigeria, the official language in Nigeria is English, even though they are native tongues. And even was it yesterday or today, or 2 days ago, myself and my husband, we still looked at each other's eyes and we're like, we need to immerse the kids in some type of language, whether it's yours or mine. We need to do this. So, yeah, I'm not, it's something that I've not, I need to do better at. So that's my own personal failure. But when it comes to, earlier I shared in terms of Nigeria, I was born in the north. My parents are Yoruba. My husband is Igbo. It's amazing to see the blend of culture, to see the love. I think for me, love unifies. So I try to just focus on that in terms of where, at the end of the day, where we all want the same thing, right? Our aspirations are similar, right? A mom in America. I used to work for Whirlpool, and we used to say every home, everywhere, with pride, passion, and performance. And the reality is that the aspirations of a white woman or a black woman or a European, or wherever you are, your desires for your kids, your aspirations for your life, all of that is the same, right? So I just try to focus on that to say, how can I be the best version of me, and how can I help other people be the best version of themselves as well? But in terms of language, I'm not doing really a good job in terms of passing that on to my kids. I'll do better.
but listen, Toyin, don't beat yourself up. But do try harder, because it is a common I don't want to say failing, but a common development for immigrant families, in part because you're surrounded by the other language and the other culture, and you spend so much time in it. It's so easy to lose those. I speak 6 languages, and I have to work to maintain some of them, because who am I going to speak Swahili with here in Pennsylvania? Nobody, right? So it's really hard. Or Tswana, said Tswana. There's no one around. So it's a challenge. But anyway, I think it was a good question. Then there's something here. Michelle Jardin, sorry?
My daughter wants to learn.
Yes.
She wants to learn. The other day, she caught me speaking with my sister. My sister she's based in London, and we were on a video call, and I was speaking to her in my language. And my daughter was like, what are you saying? I don't understand. I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. So yes, they are hungry for it. So yes, I'm taking this as, a cue to do better. Definitely. Thank you for that.
Toyin, so you're a pretty busy person, and we haven't got to your businesses yet, which I wanted to talk about. It's about 10 till. Will you be able to go a few minutes longer, or do we need to cut off at the top of the hour before I go any further?
If you're fine, I think I can go in a few minutes longer.
All right, so let's do that then, because there's some really good questions and comments here that I don't want to miss that people are asking. So let's see. There was from Michelle Jardin. She had a statement, and I'll address that statement to agree with her and explain why, and then a question for you. So Michelle Jardin said, to obtain a good education in South Africa is a costly affair. And I would agree with her, because public education is broken in South Africa, but it's not the only place. It's broken across the continent. There are very few places in Africa that have adequate, in my view, primary and secondary education that trains young Africans to be literate and functional in society. Now, it's not limited to Africa, but we're talking about Africa here. So I think that public education is a serious problem in most of Africa. And most people who have children that have a decent education, it's a consequence of somehow cobbling together the resources to be able to afford to send them to a private school that has the quality education they need. Is that an experience that you're familiar with, or does that make sense to you, Toyin?
Yes, yes. In fact, I have an opinion. So the education system across the continent is frozen in time. It's frozen in time, and it's what was handed by the British, by the French, where depending on wherever you are on the continent, if it was colonized by Britain or the colonial masters, right? And that education that was frozen in time was implemented to teach you how to become more useful to somebody else.
Right, not for yourself.
Not for yourself. Meaning, we're going to teach you how to read and write. We're going to teach you how to obey. Right? The system on the continent, you cannot challenge your teachers, right? You don't challenge your professors. You don't challenge them. Even if they are teaching you rubbish, you cannot look in their face and say, hey, I read on the internet that you're wrong. Oh, that's going to be your last day in class, right? So basically, it's frozen in time. It wasn't really supposed to help you be, transformative, or it wasn't going to help you to be a global player. It wasn't supposed to help you know exactly what your colonial masters knew. So a good place African leaders need to turn to is India. India in the late 70s, early 80s, had to rethink what they were doing with their education system. And they basically took it to the ground and rebuilt it. Right? So they made sciences required. They did a lot of stuff with mathematics, and they looked at the future and said, for the future of our nation, this is where we're trying to get to. And in order for us to get there, we have to teach ourselves how to be XYZ. And they basically redesigned their education system in India. Today, 40 years after, we see advancements in technology coming out of India. We see great things coming out of India. It's not by chance. A couple of weeks ago, I also had like a show where I was sharing the fact that when you look at regions around the world that have built their economy and grown, a resilient economy, nobody should assume that it's by chance. Nothing that happened in Vietnam is by chance. Nothing that happened in Chile is by chance. Nothing that happened in America was by chance, or Great Britain by chance. So for everybody in Africa thinking, oh, this is wrong, our education system is bad, we're so good at pointing at what is wrong. We need to start focusing on what should we be doing. And again, the education system doesn't teach us how to solve the problems we see in our community. So that's the biggest gap that I see, is that a few years ago, when I went to Africa, about 5 years ago, and I was on the streets in Nigeria, and I was looking at the youth on the road, just moving around. And as I was engaging with them, one phrase that I came up with to describe what I saw, we had a lot of literate illiterates. What I mean by that is, so for me, I write as well. So I try to use words to describe what I see. I saw a lot of people that knew how to read and write, which is fine. But in order to be literate in today's world, you needed much more than being able to read and write. The education of the past, it's of the past. Oh, let's teach them how to read and write A, B, C, D, Z. No. Today's world, education means something totally different. And even after you get your first degree and second degree and third degree, you still have to keep educating yourself. For example, I have books all over my house right now. I find myself digging deep into books, into knowledge, and just being hungry. So education in the traditional sense of the word is fine. It's just foundational. But in the world we're living today, especially for me coming from a technology space, technology is changing every day. In order for you to keep abreast, in order for you to know what's going on, you've got to be hungry, you've got to be teaching yourself. And that is a responsibility you cannot give to another person, right? We can no longer expect somebody else to educate us, not in today's world. We've got to educate ourselves. Even our kids, we've got to educate them somehow. So I know I said a lot right there. Yes, the government can do a lot in terms of the foundation of education, which is warped right now. But even those that have gone through that system today, they now have the opportunity to educate themselves. Nobody's coming. I think that's the message to Africans. Don't expect anybody to do anything for you. If that's true, then what are you going to do for yourself? And there's abundance of information out there. Anything you want to learn anywhere in the world is readily available to you on YouTube, on on social. You can learn anything you want to learn. So I think I'm talking like this type of conversations I have with my family is don't wait for anybody. Nobody's coming, right? Nobody's coming to rescue anybody from anything. We have to go out there and fish for information and use that knowledge to advance ourselves.
Well, I think you've touched on something there that's really important. I'll make a couple points here, and then we're going to talk about your businesses. But the first is that I think I've lived all over the continent, and it's different when I explain this, but it really is very much is there, and you see it in the U.S. I've seen the Generation Y, Generation X, Millennials, and not all of them, and not just them, also baby boomers as well. But I've seen it across Africa, and this culture of entitlement or expectation that someone owes you something. Life is a competition, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you're, just look at COVID-19. It's competing, and in some places it's winning. That's just the reality. Now, that doesn't mean we're Homo sapiens. We've developed culture to pad the experience of competition life. But the reality is that there is, from my perspective, this culture of expectation or entitlement that's pervasive around the world. And if you sit around with a culture of entitlement, you're not going to get anywhere because people aren't going to hand you things, and then you're going to just have grievances and be angry. The other thing is that when public school, Toyin, and this kind of talks about what you're talking about there, is that all these illiterate literates. And I would add to that by saying that one thing that we fail, I think, around the world, especially in Africa, though I see this, but here in America too, because the only reason I developed this skill, I think, is because I had two teachers in high school in public education who took an interest in me because I was poor and they thought I was bright and they wanted me to go to university. And so they spent a little extra time encouraging me and encouraged me to think critically. Critical thinking is a skill that is in short supply. I saw it on LinkedIn just this week when I posted something and I got attacked by someone who's an African. And she attacked me, and she threw all this nonsense out there, which is the stuff you get off of conspiracy websites. And I politely refuted and said, no, this isn't true. I was actually on the ground in Entebbe flying troops to the Central African Republic, not CIA operatives. So I can tell you the truth. But people just buy into these things. And this is a person that has multiple degrees. So this would be something I think is a case of the inability to do critical thinking and look at information and go, wait a second, that can't possibly be true. Let me look at the factors involved here. I think critical thinking is something that's missing across the board when it comes to education.
Yes, and somehow I also feel like the political elite in Africa wants to keep people. It's easier for you to rise to power if the population you're leading cannot think in a creative, productive way, because they're not going to question you, and you're going to be able to tell them anything, and they'll just go, "Oh, you're the best thing since sliced bread."
Yeah.
So the political elite,
it works for them.
It works for them.
Yes.
It works for them, and that's why when I study a nation like Nigeria, and you think about education. So my late father was part of establishing 2 Nigerian universities. So this is a topic that is near and dear to me. My husband is a university professor. My parents, I grew up in the house of educators from an administrative standpoint in terms of building up universities from scratch. So this is a very important topic to me personally. I know my dad wanted me to be going to PhD, and I was like, no, I just want to make money. I'll get my husband to be the PhD. I don't want to read. Anyway, I'm trying to be funny there. But I've seen education nosedive. And again, in order to build functioning societies, in order to build functioning systems, it takes considerable effort. By default, things decay. Like if you're not advancing, I think there's a American football saying, it's either you're getting better or you're getting worse, like because your competition is getting better. So there's no staying neutral. There's no neutrality when it comes to advancements. It's either you're working really hard to improve your education system or to improve your policies. It's either you're doing that or the world is leaving you behind. And I see that happen, unfortunately, to my own dear nation, where the political elites, they're not coming together to do what they should be doing. So I'm still watching, because one of the things I try to tell, just to be clear, is a lot of times people say, well, but they are good, they're nice people. And one thing I say is the best of them is being best in your heart is different from having the expertise. And the way I describe it is, imagine if you're in a hospital and there's been an accident and they bring in someone that needs to be, like, a surgeon needs to come and sew them up or whatever it is they do in the theater, right? And they're like, get us the best doctor. And then in comes a seamstress. The seamstress said, hey, I heard that in order to do this, all you need is a needle and thread. I can do this job. The reality is, I try to paint that visual, no matter how loving this seamstress tailor is, even if it's a son or a child on the operating table, can you just imagine what a messy job she's going to do? And it's because they are not trained. She's not trained to be a surgeon. That's what I see across the continent. It's not enough for a leader to mean well. That's a beginning. Hopefully that leader brings the right skill set around him. I've seen people not do that, where they mean well, but they've not brought the right people in, right? So if you don't have a skill set, as a good leader, you should be bringing the right people that have the right skill set. There's a failure right there. So my thing is that just because somebody comes from your town, comes from your region of the country, looks good, tells you they're going to fight corruption, tells you all these nice things, it doesn't mean they're going to do a good job in leadership. Leadership is a skill. Leadership requires a lot more than the beginning is you have to mean well, right? But that's not enough. Anyway, so I try to paint that picture to just help people understand that even if you need the best surgeon in the world and somebody comes in with a needle and thread and say, hey, I can do the job, you have to ask yourself different types of questions. And those are the questions the electorate in Africa should be asking themselves to say, hey, this person that we're going to vote for, we like you, but can you do the job?
Well, Toyin, honestly, I have to say that probably a lot of South Africans in the chat right now are going, are you talking about Cyril Ramaphosa? Because it sounds that's exactly who you're talking about.
Well, I've met you before. I'm not going to say anything. I won't get myself into more trouble.
No, you don't have to. The point is well taken. It's a point I make frequently. Is that people? I was in Ghana after its elections, after Jerry Rawlings left many years ago, and I went from one village to another, and went from one ethnic group to another, just a few miles apart, a few kilometers apart, driving around. And in one village, all the signs up for one party. In the other village, all the signs up for the other party. And I stopped in a cafe and I talked to Ghanaians about the election. And almost to a man and woman, they just voted for the person they thought they're supposed to vote for because this person is from my group or I like that person. And I said, so what are they going to do for the country? And they had no idea whatsoever. But now that's not restricted to Ghana. That's all over the world, including here in the United States. So there's two things I want to get in here, and then we're really going to get to your businesses because I want to do that. But we're actually peaking in viewers now. We keep going up. More people are tuning in. I think somebody must have been online. They've gone off, and now viewers are coming over. But the two things, one I'm going to address, and then I think it was Tersti, I had a question here. But by the way, the Notorious G is in the house, and that Notorious G, I think he picked up that nickname from me because his name is Gerhard in German, but in Afrikaans it's pronounced something like Gerhard, and I can't pronounce it very well, so we call him the Notorious G. Welcome, Notorious G. But UCN asked this question of me. He said, please explain how Africans believe that they are owed or sit expecting something from others. Now, I'm inferring from that, perhaps incorrectly, that UCN took umbrage with the statement that I made. But if you recall the statement I made, I didn't exclude anyone else. I said that's a global phenomenon. I didn't say it was Africans. I said it's all people over the world who have this culture of expectation. I did define it initially as millennials, Generation Y, Generation X, but then I said boomers too. I said culture of expectation. But let me give you a couple examples there, UCN, of how Africans expect things entitled. Why are African finance ministers in February going to have a finance summit and demanding that the World Bank, the IMF, and the United States and Western Europe forgive all of their debt because of COVID-19 before anything even happened in Africa with COVID-19? That's an expectation. They're also seeing an opportunity to take advantage of a crisis to wipe out their debt. Now, bear in mind, many of these are the same countries whose debt we've already forgiven twice in the 1990s and again in the 2004-2005 timeframe with HIPC, the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. We have wiped off the books $98 billion of debt in Africa alone. Yeah. So that's an expectation. That's a cultural expectation. If you borrow money, you have a moral obligation to pay that loan back. And to expect people to forgive it because you can't, or you've made a bad decision, or just because you're supposed to. And the list goes on and on. But I don't want to pick on Africans because I can pick on Americans. Go ahead, Toyin.
Okay, let me, if I can add a little perspective to that. So for me, when I talk about Africa and the continent and the reality of today, I talk about it from a place of love, from a place of understanding the realities of today. So one thing I know is that there's that mindset exists, but I've also tried to ask myself why. That mindset was introduced by the colonial master because they said, give us your wealth. We're going to manage your wealth. We're going to manage your country because maybe we don't trust you to do it. And you know what? Just go sit down. We're going to give you what you need. That was the mindset before. Oh, your oil. I mean, basically everything around the nations were managed by, I mean, we have to look at the history. So this mindset didn't just drop from the sky. This was a systematic indoctrination by the world system that told Africa, sit down, we've got you, we'll do all the work for you, and you just stay in your tent. So the world should not complain, right, when this mindset shows up in different avenues. But for me, when I now talk about trade with Africa, I'm trying to tell everybody interested in commercial engagement with the continent, especially those on ground, to say, hey, nobody's coming. Before, people told you, oh, we are bringing you aid. Even the word aid is, we're going to help you. We're going to help you. You need aid. You don't know how to do this. You don't know how to fix this. We're going to help you. The world has been saying we're going to help you. So when they ask for the help, right, it's just, so that's the reality. We now have to talk about how do we move past it, right? How do we reorient ourselves to say even foreign aid is not foreign aid? And even when I talk to people on ground and we're bringing them information and we're bringing them engagement and things they can use to feed themselves, you're putting food in front of them. And sometimes they say, oh, is this the food I need to eat? Is that the spoon? Can you feed me? So for me, I'm not saying that as an African, I'm not saying that with pride. I'm just saying these are the things we have to navigate. These are the things we have to understand. And even if we look at the world today with what's going on the, even in the US with Black Lives Matters, the world has been operating a certain way. And because of the way the world has been operating, we've created the scenarios for ourselves. Now it has unraveled before our very eyes. What are we going to do to put the pieces back in place? I think that's for me is the question. Is we may not like what we're seeing in the news. We may not like the realities of today, but that's what we have. That's what we've created. That's what we have in front of our eyes right now. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? How do we move forward? How do we engage? How do we inform ourselves? China had to figure this out for themselves 40 years ago. 1980, China wasn't where it is today. but they came together as a people. They figured out what they wanted to do. And one thing, they were very smart not to announce their goals to the world, because if they told everybody what they were trying to do, then the world would not help them achieve it. But anyway, I think Africa, as a continent, the people of Africa, they now have an opportunity to create the future they want to create. Like they have the power, they have the opportunity to create the world that they want to live in for the future. And for me, I'm excited to be a part of that and to say, okay, I see a better path, and I'm lending my voice, my expertise, my network, and helping to fast track that the creation of that better world that we all cry and we all hope for. So yeah, we all have to know that what we see today was created. The decisions of the past created the realities of today. So what are we going to do about it?
So UCN responded to my point. He says, Chris, okay, I see your perspective, but that's not the entire story, is it? Please take a look at France and how it exploits its former colonies. Absolutely, absolutely. But you can't expect me to give the entire story or my entire view in about a 30-second or 1.5 minute explanation when I'm distracting from Toyin, who's my guest here. I will go on later today with a live stream, which will be evening in South Africa, probably either 9 o'clock or 9:35 as I usually go on, and that would be at 3 o'clock or 3:35 here on the East Coast. And I'll do a stream today dedicated, just the stray voltage stream. But I'll talk about this for those who want to show up and talk about this issue that we've just raised here, because you can't cover it in such a short period of time. UCN says the French exploitation of Francophone Africa is criminal, truly unfortunate. Absolutely, we can talk about those things. Captain C. Kelt has come in from Scotland. So we have someone from Scotland who just joined us. Welcome. And okay, so I want to get back to this one last question before we talk about your businesses, Toyin. And you've been, by the way, there's some very complimentary things here in the chat. Sloth Puppy, that's an interesting handle. Sloth Puppy says, this lady is great. Enjoying the conversation, the energy of the discussion. Thank you. Good dear. Now, that's not the only one. There are many other complimentary things here. Michelle Jardin says she's really enjoying the chat. Somebody with a tag, not a communist, says China's taking over Africa. That's another subject for a different chat. But anyway, so let's see. Okay, UCN says going to come to the stream later on. Well, thank you, UCN. And come in and ask your questions. And I won't even ask you to make a super chat to ask your question. But one more last question from, not in the broadcast, folks, but one question that I'm taking from the chat is that Tertia Basson earlier asked a question about, now I don't know that this is really your bailiwick or your expertise, but if you can answer it or if you'd like to answer it, go ahead. But she asked what do you think about South Africa as an investment option given the downgrade of its credit ratings? Because famously Moody's finally downgraded the credit rating. So all the ratings agencies have listed sovereign debt in South Africa as junk status. But that's only part of the picture in South Africa. So it's not a good picture from my perspective. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'll answer it from a philosophical standpoint. I think it's going to get worse. So I want to talk about it more from the relationships that South Africa has with the rest of Africa, and the relationship South Africa has with the rest of the world. The last 2 years, 3 years, that relationship is being redefined, right? So before the last two years, South Africa would go to the rest of the world and say, hey, we're the gateway to the continent, right? We're the gateway to Africa. South Africa would go to all over the world and say, hey, invest in Africa. When you invest in South Africa, you're investing in Africa. And for a long time, foreign investors bought into that, and they kept pouring investments onto the continent with the hopes that they were actually buying into Africa. So from a philosophical standpoint, the rest of the continent, there's this, I know the current president of South Africa is now the chairman of the African Union. That's by design, because South Africa needs to rebuild its relationship with the rest of the continent.
Yes,
right?
It does.
I'm sorry, yes, because the next wave of investments may bypass South Africa, because other countries on the continent, they've now mastered the art of attracting investment for themselves. So whereas all the dollar or most of the dollar was going into South Africa for a long time, because South Africa was very good with promotion, investment promotion, you find them everywhere. They were promoting, attracting investment. In fact, President Ramaphosa announced that it was raising $100 billion. That was last or 2 years ago, and they've already met like $30 billion. So foreign investors like that, and they've been pouring investment into Africa. But now there's more competition with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. You see places like Rwanda popping up. You see Egypt popping up. You see Nigeria. You see Ghana. You see, so every country now on the continent is vying for the same investment that South Africa used to vie for before. So that's the philosophical landscape that we have today, is that the rest of the continent has gotten louder. They've gotten more savvy, and they're also saying, hey, South Africa doesn't represent us anymore, right? Because before, South Africa would say, hey, invest in Africa, come to South Africa. Invest in South Africa, come to South Africa. But now Ghana is able to say invest in Ghana. Rwanda is attracting a lot. That tiny country, 2 years ago, I actually had 3 investors that invest in Ghana on a panel discussing with them in terms of what's going on. 2 of them are advisors of President Kagame as well. So I think South Africa has to, if they want to benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, they have to reposition themselves differently, and they also have to engage differently with the rest of the world. And I've not seen that happen. I don't think the message is clear yet. And I think that's what you're going to be seeing in your markets, in your local market as well, is because what role is South Africa going to play in actualizing the Continental Free Trade Agreement? If you can address that, then the prosperity of South Africa in the future is solidified.
No, I think it's a great point. It's one of 3 main theses I have, or three reasons why South Africa is struggling. One, you've got it, and I'll come back to the third one. One is their macroeconomic policies are wrong-headed. At a time when people are trying to guarantee property rights around Africa, that's something that people are trying to fix. South Africa is going the opposite direction with expropriation without compensation. They already have a mechanism to do this in the Constitution for the public good. They can take property if it's in the public interest, just like we can do it eminent domain here in the U.S. But now they want to just take property without, and by doing that, they're undermining property rights. Who in their right mind wants to put foreign direct investment in a country where they're going to nationalize your investment? That's insane. And there's other macroeconomic policies. But the next is, the cost of doing business and being effective are dramatically lowered because of what we're doing right now. This IT, this capability, which has made it easier for small countries without huge capital outlays to jump and leapfrog ahead of others with their ability to be flexible. So the IT helps out, and not just IT, but that's a big part. And then what you're saying is other countries in Africa have upped their game. You've mentioned a few of them, Rwanda, but I would throw in Ethiopia, Morocco. Yes. I'd throw in Ethiopia and Morocco as well as 2 countries that are really open for business, especially Ethiopia of late. Morocco for 15 years now has quietly become a giant in economic issues in West Africa. And a lot of people don't realize that. So I think those 3 things, South Africa is, in my view, it's biased. I'm very biased against it because I have issues with, but their failed macroeconomic policies. Number one, the ease of business being cheaper and less expensive, and people able to jump in the game and be effective because of IT innovations. And the third one is what you said, this upping their game, other African countries. And not only is South Africa going to be bypassed, they're already being bypassed. Money is pouring in Ethiopia.
Yes, and so yes to everything you talked about. And even I think the most important thing they're also not doing is they're not managing the narrative, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's good. The narrative, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've found to be most important, whether you're attracting investment or not, is how are you knocking down all the negative press out there? If you let it fly, and you leave it alone, then it sticks, right? It sticks. So even no matter how bad things could get, as long as you're managing your narrative and you're not letting other people just report, and you're not coming back with your own your own narrative. If you don't own the narrative and manage your brand, then this is what you get as well, right? To say we're working on it, so maybe the current leadership of South Africa, they've also lost that PR stunt that is required to keep the brand of a nation. Because when you think about trust, investments goes to markets that they trust. And if the trust level goes down and you don't show that you have it under control through PR and all of that, it's like a double whammy. You're hurting yourself as well. So you've got to own your narrative whatever nation you are, US, China, India, you've got to be able to tell people who you are, what you're about, and also show them that you have a clear path to success. Otherwise, the investors, they react to noise. We see it on the stock market here. For every negative news, it's like up, it's like down. For every positive news, it's like up. So maybe that's also something the current administration is not investing enough in. All the soft skills, this communication thing that a lot of people seem to dismiss. I'm coming to find it's probably one of the most important things you have to manage your PR.
No, what you're talking about on the national level is a term that fell into some disrepute. I don't answer but disfavor, I should say. People didn't like it, but I still favor the term. It's strategic communications. That's what you're talking about. On a national level, it's because what you're trying to influence outside your country, your narrative. That's strategic communications. Speaking of building your brand, we're going to get to it in a second, but one last thing I want to address here before we get to building about your brands is that UCN has had another comment here talking about South Africa will remain the destination of choice as long as the rest of Africa remains backward. For example, the legal system, basic infrastructure. Okay, well, we're not going to get into that now. Come to the stream later today. We'll talk about it. But what I will say is that we'll talk about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, something that I think is a great idea, but has serious shortcomings, particularly when it comes to right of redress, being able to do things legally, courts, processing that thing, intellectual property protections, all of that we can discuss later on. But now we're going to shift our focus because I've invited Toyin on here because she's a dynamic entrepreneur, and I want to talk briefly about your businesses. You've got, is it Nazaru, I think is how you pronounce it, is one of your company. You have a beauty brand, Omooba, I think it is, or something like that, if you could tell us about it. And then, of course, famously, you have the Trade with Africa Summit, which is something designed. This is my view from the outside, so you tell me if I'm wrong. The idea is to get businesses in North America to wake up and realize that they should be trading with places in Africa and companies in Africa and try to facilitate that and open people's eyes. Did I get it right?
Yeah, about plus.
Yeah, well, there's more. I want to give you a chance to speak, so go ahead.
Okay, so for those who joined us maybe halfway in, at the beginning I shared about my background in corporate America. I know you had introduced me as executives at corporate. I had access to my work allowed me to work closely with a lot of executives at Walmart, but I was in open management. That's what they call it. But because I was in strategy, I played that role. So I know a lot of times people, because of the work I do today, it's very hard for them to understand what I used to do before, but it's just incredible. So if you joined us midstream, please go back and watch this video over again where I talked a lot about my background. So coming to Nazaru, Trade with Africa, and Omooba Beauty. So for me, I worked in retail, right, before. I've worked in manufacturing and then most recently working at the headquarters of Walmart. And for me, being in that world exposed me to global trade at a ridiculous level. So Walmart is like half a trillion. Is that the number? Yeah, it's a big company. And when you think about that world in terms of the transactions, the supply chain, the logistics, the manufacturing that feeds into that world, that's just one company. When you think about all the other retailers like Target and all of them, right, you realize that the world of value addition, of manufacturing, of agriculture value chain, of producing products, that's the world that largely the continent is not part of the end product. The continent, Africa, is part of maybe at the early stage of the value addition, maybe growing things like shea butter that is used in the beauty industry, or growing cashew, but then the cashew is exported to Vietnam and processed before being brought into US. So in terms of the agricultural value chain, the continent is not owning the entire value chain. And what I found when you follow the money trail is because the money and the revenue is made at the tail end of the value chain, not at the beginning of the value chain. And that's one of the things I realized in terms of development, poverty, all of that. It contributes to what we're seeing on the continent today, to say, if you really want to develop economically, you need to figure out your value chain and you need to own your value chain, the entire value chain. And for me, that understanding and that knowledge is what I brought into Trade with Africa. because I realized that this is the way forward for the continent, right? You've got to master these value chains. You've got to know how to not only grow a product, but you need to process it. You need to brand it. You need to know how to distribute it. You need to know how to sell it. You need to understand how to move it in terms of your logistics and your transportation and your road network. Road networks do not just appear randomly. They are usually developed around routes of trade, right? So where are the routes of trade on the continent? That's the question. And how do you grow those routes of trade? So for me, the concept of Trade with Africa was a realization of, wow, we say we want economic growth, but we are all we've been doing is managing numbers, right? Managing numbers. But the real engine of growth is manufacturing, is supply chain, is logistics. When you look all over the world, the people that got it right, that's what they got right. So Trade with Africa is about bringing business leaders, executives, policymakers, innovators, bringing them around this idea that we need to start creating value chains. And this year, this is our third year. This year, we're actually going to be covering agriculture, manufacturing, and infrastructure development, and looking at what are the value chains of those, what are the gaps, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges. We found out that sometimes it's policy, sometimes it's investment. So we try to bring all the stakeholders that is involved, the banks, we bring banks together, we bring policy leaders together, we bring investors together, and we say, hey, Trade with Africa, what does it look like, or what does it need to look like? What are the roles that people need to play? And, what's the playbook, right? What's the playbook? What's the framework under which we can actually start growing the economy? And we bring examples. We bring business cases. We bring real business leaders. For example, we had Scott Ford, the CEO of Westrock Coffee, which is the single largest private investor in Rwanda. And what does he do? He aggregates coffee from over 50,000 farmers in East Africa. Wow. And then supplies Starbucks, hotel chains, right? Sam's Club with aggregated coffee. This company started in Rwanda and is now the world's largest coffee roasting company in the world. Wow, so that awesome. That was the story we featured in 2018. And the reason we featured it is because we're saying this is what's possible. This is what is a game changer for the continent. It's not just about growing coffee on the farm. Yes, but there's an entire value chain built around that. It's not enough to just say, yes, we have cocoa, but there's a chocolate value chain. That's where the money is. But it does take a lot of work. We also featured the former CEO of Tyson Foods. For those who live in the US, Tyson Foods, for every 3 poultry products eaten in America, Tyson Foods produced one. It's a $40 billion agri business. And the immediate past CEO, Donnie Smith, was one of our speakers in 2018, talking about the chicken poultry business and what's possible on the continent. So for us, it's taking this very complex economic topics and just bringing it down to everyday business terms. Chicken. You can actually build a $40 billion business just from chicken and eggs. And we show you who has done it before, and we show you what they've done before. And we say, hey, it takes years. It's not an overnight thing, but these are the value chains that Africa now needs to start building. So Nazaru has evolved. I started out with, this is the solution. And then for a couple of engagement, I was like, no, people actually need more. So we've actually grown our services. We now actually provide business education. Because believe it or not, while we go around saying Trade with Africa, the diaspora community that needs to be a part of this engine of growth, they come back to us and you're looking at what they're doing and you're like, oh my goodness, the basics of business, the foundation is not even there. Like business development, sales development, channel, sales channel, distribution channel, export development, all these basic business terms. I mean, that's the world I lived in. I'm finding out that my community and my people and the people that are interested and listening to what I'm saying, I've had in recent times, especially with the COVID-19, I've had to go back down and I've had to tell myself, Toyin, okay, it's great that you want to go to the moon, but you have to teach people how to even do.
You got to build the rocket first.
Thank you. So that's why you're good. I'm sure probably you found me holding a pen, and some clips and some videos I've put out there of me drawing business development and say, this is how you build a business. This is how you find your customer. This is how you build your business model. This is how you build your sales channel, distribution channel. Oh, this is tariff. This is non-tariff. I found myself, and it's fun, because I came to this from, coming from that world. I was like, trade with Africa, let's go, let's go. And then I look back and I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, you find yourself on the raft, floating away from the dock, and you're all alone. There's no motor to push the boat. So you've got to go back, build the boat, build the bridge, whatever it takes. Yeah.
Yes, and this journey has always been about products. So when I now talk about Omooba beauty brand, for me, I'm telling people this is what you need to do, and then I'm showing them what to do. But I also feel like people are not making the connection. Omooba beauty brand is about creating value products from shea butter from Africa.
Yeah, that's excellent.
And the brand name is an African name that people recognize. So not only am I saying trade with Africa, I'm also turning around. I'm saying I'm doing this. This is what, pick a product, pick something, pick cashew, pick cocoa, pick anything in your community and run on the entire value chain. That's my challenge. If you're an African listening to this, look around you, whether it's moringa, whether it's shea butter, whether it's marula oil, whether it's coconut oil, whether it's cocoa, whether it's cashew, whether it's groundnuts, look around you, pick a product and tell yourself, I'm going to develop a new value chain around this product that I can own and pass on to my children. That's what the rest of the world has done. And that is a multi-trillion dollar world that Africans are yet to participate in. So for me, that's always been the game. But I found that for me, I need to do a better job of communicating that. Because when I just say trade with Africa, I think it gets lost. It's so grand. Now I'm trying to bring it home to say it's about value creation. It's about building businesses that are sustainable and owning the entire value chain. That's what the world has figured out.
No, Toyin, I think you made a good point there. It's interesting. You had an idea, and as it develops, you realize there's much more to this idea, and it's going to go somewhere else. So, for instance, with my strategic consultancy I started here after leaving active service, the Indaba Africa Group, the intent was simply to use it as a place to park when I get asked to come speak at a conference or participate, like in writing a national security strategy in a country, so I could put the contracts against that and have a business. So to offer business advice and investment and national security advice to clients. But since then, now I have people who have been approaching me that want me because of connections and ties and my experience in Africa to help them sell personal protective equipment because of COVID-19, coffee, also promotion of events and things like that. So my vision is changing now, and maybe I actually wind up getting involved in retail and marketing and manufacturing potentially as well too. And that's not even the idea I had. So I think the point that both of us are trying to make here without actually explicitly stating is that the world is your oyster. And no one's going to get the oyster for you. So if you have an idea, be creative and go out and get it. Now, by the way, Yanni Vandervat, who's one of my favorite subscribers, has come in late. Sorry you made it late, Yanni, but tune in and watch the video again because it's very fascinating. It's a fantastic guest. So very quickly, Toyin, before we wrap up here, there was a question about would Nazaru be interested in investing in education in South Africa? I don't know if that's something you would do. Maybe in the future you'll think about that. But there was another question here from Dan Vakman, and Dan said, well, is it in the interest of the world to keep Africa behind? I'm not going to address that. Let's not talk about that because that's a 2-hour discussion. We'll talk about that in my stream later on. There are some actors in the world that is advantageous for, but they're idiots. Everyone's interest is for Africa to succeed because I want a place to sell my overpriced rich white people toy, also known as an iPod or an iPhone, in Africa. And I want consumers that can afford to buy those things. Anyway, so we'll talk about that in another stream. There was one last question here. if I can ask it of you. It's from Keith Alderson. It's a very good one, and I think it's a useful one to share from your experience, Toyin. Do you find gifted people with skills, drive, and the willingness to take risk to gain return whilst they learn from their own mistakes, or do you coach people by training and working along with them? So do you look for those people with all that talent, or do you just take anybody and try to craft and help them and mentor them and coach them?
I do. So lately, I've actually started trying to formalize the way I coach, and I also took my own advice in terms of business development to say, how do I describe the type of people that I can help, right? Because I cannot help everybody. So the way I would describe what I came up with, maybe I'll test it out, and I need your feedback on this. So for me, there are people that are crawling. When you think about the world of business, right? Yeah. There are people that are standing, they don't know what to do. They have no idea what to do. There are people that are crawling, they've started it, but they don't know. There are people running. There are people standing or walking, right? But for me, I think the biggest game changer, the biggest impact that I can have is when I engage with those people that are running and they are looking to fly. Meaning they've been doing everything they can do. They've done it all. Like, for example, the meeting I had yesterday, she's created products. She's in Nigeria. She's created products. She's branded it. She's just looking for new markets. She's ready to fly. I can immediately have an impact on that business, right? So that's like my desirable type of client. Like, those are the people that I would love to find. But I also recognize that it takes years for people to actually get there. So what I've done is to create a community online. So Nazaru.trade is now a community, a digital community, where there's now a lot of people where no matter where you are on that stage, you can actually get resources, information, network. You can actually get education, courses that would help you start your journey. Because the journey I'm telling people to get on, I also recognize it's not a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year journey. It's a journey of a lifetime. So you're going to need help. You're going to need a support group. You're going to need support. You're going to need training. Every time you're on that journey and you have a question, what we're now positioning ourselves to be is a go-to place for your questions. Not just myself, I've created a community of different people of expertise and knowledge that you can tap into, people other than myself that will be right there to support you on your journey. But in terms of me as an individual, the type of people I want is, if you're already running, if you already own a business and you're looking to move to the next level, either to exposure, a global exposure for your business. Because if you're walking around business with Africa, you don't get a lot of attention in the press.
No.
You don't get a lot of exposure. So for me, I have had to navigate all of that. Think about the success of Trade with Africa. I usually joke and say, hey, imagine if it was Trade with China. How many planes would have flown in from China to attend that event? Exactly. How many support, how the world would have rallied around my event. So I recognize the uphill battle that those that are business, that are in the trenches, building businesses around the continent, I recognize their pain point. And for me, we now support those people to amplify their message, to gain global exposure, because we've done it for ourselves. We now own platforms. We now own community. So we can quickly help you get the word out there. So that's the beauty of what we now have. That's now what we have. But it's taken us years and twists and turns and painful processes to build Trade with Africa, to build the Nazaru trade community, to now start trying to educate people, to build the brand and the product. And there are other products we have in the pipeline as well, skincare line, a fabric. So for example, the brand is trademarked, right? And we are pushing an African brand right here in the US. So we also help other brands that want to get into this market. So I know I said a lot. I shared out there. And the reality is that we found ourselves that Africa is an underserved region. That's the reality. Highly, highly underserved. And there's a lot of opportunities to support. Just think about value chain, supply chain. What I'm saying is with this work, you're going to have more trucking businesses. You're going to have more transportation logistics business. You're going to have more processing plants. Like there's room for everybody in terms of making this value chain work. This is not something one person can do. So, that's also something we have to talk about is form a group, get into a community. Global trade is not a one-man show. Like all those things you do in your local market. So I say local market, regional market, global market, the way you operate in your local market. Oh, this is my business. It doesn't work that way. On the global market, it's like, it's a community of traders. It's like they handshake. Somebody is distributing, somebody is manufacturing, somebody is transporting, somebody is branding, and they are all working seamlessly together. So one thing I try to tell my African brothers and sisters is stop working alone. Stop working in silo. It doesn't work. You're not going to be able to move fast based on your own wings alone. You actually need to flock together. So go find yourself an association, a community, because guess what? If you're in a group, you can actually advocate. You can actually approach your government better. You can say, we want this road here. So there's so much you can do. So for me, so I bring to this conversation a lot of knowledge, expertise, but there's so much practicality to the work that I do. I'm not just like, I don't want to be just an events planner. It's a strategy of bringing people together to develop strategy and implement those strategies as well for economic development.
Well, Toyin, that's a fantastic way to wrap this up, I think. There's a really good question here, which I don't think we're going to get to, but I'll ask UCN, who's had a lot of really good points and questions, to tune into the stream later on, and I'll address this, but I'll just mention the question, because if we start answering it, it'll be another half hour, and you've been incredibly generous with your time. I remember at the top of the hour, I said, can you go a little bit longer? You said, sure, and now we're 41 minutes past. You've been very generous. So free investment advice you've all gotten here on the Indaba Africa channel. But UCN's question is, what's your advice to Nigerian entrepreneurs who lack funds to move their businesses to the next level? Given local banks charge 20 to 30% interest rate on loans, what's your advice? It looks like Toyin wants to answer that question.
Go for that. Please let me go for it.
You want to address it? Go ahead. Because banks are only one answer. There are so many other venues to get funding, but go ahead.
Yes. But the first thing you need is not money. The first thing you need is a solid business model that you've tested and works. Because here's what, if you have a failed business model, if anybody gives you any money, 6 months from now, you're going to be back where you started from.
Exactly. You're just wasting the money.
It's cash flow.
Yep.
Like if you're not making money right now from whatever it is you're doing, don't go looking for more money. Hear me well. If you're not making money, I'm not saying your rate of making, like, make sure your business model, and these are the candidates this is why I developed the business sales and business development training, to say the fundamental of your business. An investor is looking for a model that is already tested, that you're generating 1, 2, 3, right? You're able to sell to 10, 15, and they bring their money to help you scale. They bring in the money to help you scale your business model. So you need to prove that you have a winning business that has customers and you're able to generate fund. And now what you're asking for is scaling that, and tell you, if you have that, there's no investor that will turn you down. Yeah. If you have that business model, the banks are where you can show them a cash flow, and you're telling them you're projecting 5 years, you can produce this, and you can show them the pipeline. It's a no-brainer. But the reason most people are being turned down is because on the line, they don't have a solid business model. They're just looking for somebody else's money to keep them running.
And why would you put your money into somebody's pocket who doesn't have a successful business model? That's why they're not getting money.
Yes. So first thing, go and research. You can take my training or go and research business model development. It's a science that Silicon Valley and big brands use to provide services to people. So this is a topic that I'm finding I have to teach people.
Yeah.
I'm telling them, let's trade with Africa, but the fundamentals of business, it's like missing. When you have a customer, think about their pain points and their gains. What are your customers' pain points? What are your customers' gain? Build a value proposition that meets the need of, helping them create a gain or helping them remove their pain points. Once you have a value proposition that targets that customer, the next thing is building a business model that you then design. How do I get paid providing the services for these people? That's the fundamental. Go build that business model, and then that's how you create your business plan, and it's your business plan you take to the bank or an investor. Without that underlying stuff, nobody's giving you a dime. Like in the business community, they look at your business model and it doesn't make sense. They're like, come on, right? So anyway, thank you for allowing me to just quickly jump in there.
No, it's fine. UCN is sorry, talking over you. Sorry, Toyin. UCN jumped back in and said that his point was that the cost of funds is very expensive. That's true, but there's a reason for that, because the banks are taking a huge risk with an unproven model and with businesses in Nigeria. But come to my stream later. We'll talk about that if you show up, UCN. You said you're already going to show up. Anyway, so you listen, Toyin, you've been very generous with your time. An hour and 45 minutes. We haven't even gotten to really important issues. You touched on it, like vertical integration. I always listen to people whinge about, oh, it's so unfair for Cote d'Ivoire. We don't make any money off our cocoa. Well, stop growing just cocoa and start getting in the marketplace for making chocolate and developing that into marketing and strategies. Anyway, vertical integration, maybe another day. So maybe we can get you to come back and have a conversation and talk about these things, and maybe talk about your beauty line. We barely touched on that at a future time. So do you think maybe we can get you back at some point? I think people would be happy.
At your service.
All right. Well, Toyin, I'm going to ask you to stay on the line. I'm going to take your off the screen. Just hang on for a minute as I close out the show, and then I'll just chat with you briefly when we're done, okay?
Okay,
so
thank
just,
you.
Just hang on.
Bye.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is Toyin Umesiri. Sorry, I got her name right all along. Get it wrong at the end here. She is a fantastic guest, a wonderful person. I was a speaker at her Trade with Africa Summit last year in Chicago, and it was a wonderful experience for networking and also sharing views on what people need to do to be successful in trading with Africa and be successful in business in Africa. So listen, she's got a lot of different social media presences and internet presences. Look below the video in the description, and you will see a list of all these different websites she has. She has her personal website, her company website for Nazaru. Also, she has a website to a ministry. If you're a person of faith and you're interested in that, that's something for you to take a look at. Her beauty brand, Omooba Beauty, is also listed there. And then she has a live show on Facebook now, which she started recently, and you may find that interesting. It's one thing I should say is, if you don't have time to watch our stream and you don't have time to get deeply involved in this, you could also watch Shark Tank. Many of the things that we're talking about here you find in Shark Tank. Those guys are all about finding, as Toyin mentioned, a business that is already profitable or on the path to profitability that can be scaled. If you can't scale the business, the sharks don't want you because they're not going to make any money off it. So ladies and gentlemen, this has been a production of the Indaba Africa Group. I'm Chris. I will be doing a live stream later today in South Africa. That'll probably be after 9 p.m. I'll set the time shortly after I take a break here. And for those around the world, it'll be at after 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the U.S. So I want to thank my guest, Toyin, very profoundly for her coming on. She's been a wonderful guest and very informative. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I want to thank you all very much, and I'm going to say God bless. Have a safe and pleasant day or evening, depending where you find yourself around the globe. And we'll see you next time. This has been a special feature with my guest, Toyin Umesiri, a Nigerian-American entrepreneur and a fantastic guest. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a wonderful time.